I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons first. Thank you so much to my Bibliospren, Bibliohowlers, and my Bibliomancers. It means a lot to me that you give me your extra support for my passion and hobby. Hi everyone, Petrik here. In today's video, I'll be talking about Mistborn Trilogy and also giving you recommendations on what books or series to read if you love Mistborn Trilogy by Sanderson. It has been a while since I made this kind of video. I think the last time it was more than a year ago. But for this series of videos on my YouTube channel, I have made only, I think, 2 videos. The first one was for if you like The Faithful and the Fallen, then read these books. And then after that, I posted, if you like The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, then read these books. And today, finally, I think it is time to recommend you what books to read if you love Mistborn Trilogy. And it is quite a surprise because after checking it, Mistborn Trilogy has been out for 18 years. Well, this year it will be 18 years old. Yeah, it's quite old now. It's not a new book anymore. It's not a new series anymore. And even then, it is still one of the most staples fantasy series right now. Many people still come into fantasy through reading Mistborn Trilogy, like I am. And with that in mind, I still get a lot of questions on what books to read if you like Mistborn Trilogy. And the purpose of this video is to give you some recommendations, to be more precise, 10 recommendations on books or series to read if you love Mistborn Trilogy. And like always, I will be giving these recommendations based on some of the key aspects of what made the Mistborn Trilogy so good and why I think you will still like this series if you love the Mistborn Trilogy. So let's start from the first recommendation. And this is, of course, this will be super obvious, but the first recommendation is to read more of Sanderson's books in the Cosmere. I think it goes without saying that if you love Mistborn Trilogy, I think there is a really good chance you will love reading the other books by Sanderson in the Cosmere universe, specifically on Elantris, Warbreaker, and then Mistborn Era 2. And of course, if you want something bigger and more epic, and my favorite of them all, it is the Stormlight Archive. It is the best work by Sanderson. So even though Mistborn Trilogy ended very satisfyingly, let's assume that you end up loving the series thoroughly like I did. I strongly suggest you to pick more books by Sanderson in the Cosmere. But moving on to the next recommendation for non-Sanderson's books, if you love Mistborn Trilogy and you love the plotting and also you love the type of foreshadowing and writing style in the series, I think you will really like the Licanius Trilogy by James Islington. So, James Islington wrote this trilogy after he read the Mistborn Trilogy and also the Kingkiller Chronicle by Petrik Rothfuss. These two were the series that really pushed him into trying to write his own series, and that is the Licanius Trilogy. And something that is truly incredible about this, I have always been a fan of James Islington ever since the Licanius Trilogy, and the release of the Will of the Many last year just pushed him into a new level of fame, and I'm really happy for him because I do think the Will of the Many is his best book so far. But before that, we have the Licanius Trilogy, and if you love the type of foreshadowing in Mistborn Trilogy, meaning that from the first book, even though you haven't realized it yet when you were reading it for the first time, there were already some big hints and seeds of foreshadowing planted since the beginning, since the Final Empire, the first book in the Mistborn Trilogy. And the same thing is also applicable to the Licanius Trilogy ever since the first book, The Shadow of What Was Lost, and this is The Light of All That Falls. This is the third and the conclusion of the Licanius Trilogy. And just like Mistborn Trilogy, even though this is a different kind of series compared to Mistborn, but the way James Islington planted the foreshadowing and also makes sure everything established in the previous books, in The Shadow of What Was Lost and also An Echo of Things to Come, all of them matters in the light of all that falls. And this is one of the best endings that I have read in epic fantasy, just like Mistborn Trilogy. And also the next recommendation. My next recommendation is The Riyria Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan. Some of you might be confused by this because this is, as far as storytelling style goes, it is very different to Mistborn Trilogy, but the same rule applies. One of the things that matters to me the most about Mistborn is, again, how everything written since the first book matters to the conclusion, and The Riyria Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan definitely has that strength as well in the storytelling. And also, as far as writing style goes, I do think that The Riyria Revelations, just like Mistborn Trilogy, is very accessible to newcomer to the fantasy genre. I mean, I did started with reading Mistborn Trilogy as my first time reading adult fantasy series, and then not long after that, I read the Riyria Revelations, and well, although I was initially disappointed with the first two books, or the first omnibus, The Theft of Swords, but by the end, the Riyria Revelations became one of my favorite series of all time, and it is all thanks to The Heir of Navran, the third and the conclusion, the third omnibus and the concluding volume to the Riyria Revelations. And if you like the type of foreshadowing, planning, and how everything came together in the final book, just like in Mistborn Trilogy, I think you will really like the Riyria Revelations. The first omnibus was The Theft of Swords, and then the second omnibus, it was The Rise of Empire, and then finally The Heir of Navran. So those two recommendations, the Licanius Trilogy and also the Riyria Revelations, is my recommendation based on storytelling structure, foreshadowing, satisfying ending, and how everything came together in the end, and also accessible writing style. But for the next recommendation, I'm going to recommend this based on premise and how similar they are. So for this one, I'm going to choose Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. I will be surprised if Mistborn The Final Empire is not a part of the inspiration behind the creation of the Foundryside, because when I was reading Foundryside, the first book in the Founders Trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett, I was constantly reminded of Mistborn Trilogy. Sanxia, the main character, reminded me of Vin, and also the setting, the writing style, and the pacing, everything just reminded me of reading Mistborn Trilogy. Well, only for the first book, Mistborn The Final Empire. And I should note though, even though the Foundryside, I definitely recommend this if you love Mistborn The Final Empire, but the next two books, they are very different compared to the rest of Mistborn Trilogy. So this is my recommendation only if you like Mistborn The Final Empire. I think you will like reading Foundryside as well. Robert Jackson Bennett is really one of the most underrated authors in the science fiction and fantasy genre, in my opinion, and I do wish more people will pick up his books, the Divine City Trilogy, this trilogy, or maybe his newest books, The Tainted Cup. As for the next two recommendations, again, remember that Mistborn The Final Empire, the main storyline revolves around a heist, and also one of the most likable things about that book is how Vin became close with her newfound family, or the group of thieves that is trying to pull off a heist led by Kelsier. So for the next one, I'm going to recommend The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, the first book in the Gentleman Bastards. One of the best heist-centered narrative fantasy novel of all time, really. Love this one very much, and lately there has been a lot of news regarding the Gentleman Bastards, mainly on the special edition. It really makes me think that this is probably leading to the release of The Thorn of Amberlane. Do not quote me on that. This is just my instinct, but I hope that is true. But really, if you love the high-centered narrative in Mistborn Final Empire, you love Vin's camaraderie with Kelsier, Doxon, Breeze, and Ham, and many other characters in the book, I think you should try reading The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. And I guess the same can also be applied to the next recommendations, even though these are not my favorite series, but I do think I have seen many people who like Mistborn The Final Empire also enjoyed reading the Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. This is a YA fantasy duology, and yeah, this is a very high-centered narrative as well, around a group of thieves trying to pull off a heist. I think up to today, the Six of Crows duology is still praised by many readers to be Leigh Bardugo's best work, and I cannot really fault them on that. I don't usually click with a lot of YA fantasy in the series, but this one definitely was a good one, and I think if I somehow end up reading this series again, I think I will have a better time reading it, because I do like the heist in Six of Crows and also the dialogues between the characters. I think they were very engaging to read. So those are my recommendations based on heist and also group of thieves. As for the final 4 recommendations, of course, I'm going to be recommending this based on hard magic system similar to Mistborn Trilogy. I mean, the Mistborn Trilogy, Allomancy, is still one of the best, maybe even the best magic system that I have come across in reading epic fantasy novels. And it is not too often that I encountered a fantasy series that reminded me of reading Allomancy, but I think I can give my recommendations using this category through these 4 books. And the first one is the Draconis Memoria trilogy by Anthony Ryan. I don't think a lot of people talk about the Draconis Memoria trilogy. This is a very dragon-based fantasy series by Anthony Ryan, quite different from a lot of his other books, and I have read pretty much almost everything by Anthony Ryan. But remember how in the Mistborn Trilogy, it is only through drinking manals that the Mistborn or the magic users in that trilogy can use their powers. And the same thing is in the Draconis Memoria trilogy. But instead of manals, they have to drink dragon's blood. There are different abilities channeled through drinking a different dragon's blood and all that. So if you like reading Allomancy in Mistborn Trilogy, I think this series is worth a try. Plus, take a look at this cover art. This cover art, the UK cover edition, is illustrated by Jamie Jones, and it is so badass, not gonna lie. As for my next recommendation, it will be the Lightbringer series by Brent. I am recommending the Lightbringer series only because of the magic system. Reading this instantly reminded me of reading the magic system that is often found in Brandon Sanderson's books, especially Mistborn Trilogy and also Warbreaker, because colors is heavily involved in the Lightbringer series, in the magic system of the Lightbringer series. But as far as plotting goes, although I do admit that the series contained a lot of incredible plot twists, but it is a very different type of story, and also the characters are different compared to the one in Mistborn Trilogy. So I'm recommending this based on the magic system. And then after that, I'm going to recommend the Powder Mage series, or In the Shadows of Lightning by Brian McClellan. It will not come as a surprise that the Powder Mage or In the Shadows of Lightning will be one of my recommendations, because Brian McClellan is definitely an author that is inspired by Brandon Sanderson. Well, of course, he is a Brandon Sanderson student. And the magic system in the Powder Mage demonstrated how much he is inspired by Brandon Sanderson, but this is still his very own work. The Powder Mage is different. It is a flintlock fantasy, and it is not similar to Mistborn Trilogy. But if you like the magic system in Mistborn Trilogy and you want a faster and action-oriented series, you cannot go wrong with reading the Powder Mage series. I think there are 6 books in the Powder Mage universe. I do not think Brian McClellan is planning to expand the Powder Mage universe anytime soon. So it is the Powder Mage Trilogy, and then the Gods of Blood and Powder trilogy, and then that's it. That's the conclusion to the Powder Mage universe, and In the Shadows of Lightning is his newest book. I am not a fan of In the Shadows of Lightning. I have admitted this, but the Powder Mage series, especially the first trilogy, it was a complete hit with me. It was compelling, and even though it is not without its flaws, I really couldn't put it down. It was super thrilling and engaging to read. And then for the final recommendation, this is a series I'm in the middle of reading, but I can already recommend this just from reading the first book, and it is the Threadlight trilogy. I have read only the first book, The Voice of War, but there is absolutely no way you reading this and you don't think of Brandon Sanderson's books, whether it's the magic system or the background of one of the main characters, Chris. Chris reminded me a lot of Dalinar from the Stormlight Archive, but the magic system here with the push and pull to fly and all that, it really reminded me a lot of Mistborn Trilogy. Threadlight is really like a mix of Mistborn and also Lightbringer. Yeah, the magic system is like a mix of Allomancy and the magic system in Lightbringer, which I cannot recall right now because it has been a while since I read Lightbringers. And yeah, as I said, I've read only the first book. The writing style is also something like Sanderson's. It is very accessible, vivid, easy to visualize in my mind, engaging, and it is not distracting to the plot or character's development at all. It is meant to be read easily, and it has achieved its job. I do hope that Stones of Light and Bonds of Chaos will be superior, and I will read the second book, Stones of Light, within this month. But yeah, I do recommend this if you like Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. So yeah, that's it. That's more than 10 books or 10 series I recommend if you like reading the first Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. Mistborn, the first trilogy, as you all probably know by now, is the most important series that I have ever read. Without that series, I would be reading all of these fantasy books. It is the gateway for me to start reading fantasy novels. And because of that, it means too much. It means a lot to me. So I hope these recommendations will click with you if you haven't read any of them. I do think that any one of this can work nicely if you love reading Mistborn Trilogy. But do let me know what you think about them if you have read them. And also, if not, do tell me, what would you recommend to other readers who like reading Mistborn Trilogy? What books or series would you recommend? And yeah, as always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye-bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.